Alex Hearn is a member of Wimbledon synagogue. He is a co-director of Labour Against Anti-Semitism, who submitted a huge body of evidence for the Equality and Human Rights Commission report into the Labour Party, as well as exposing the anti-Semitism of the National Union of Students president, prompting the NUS investigation to be opened. He is a regular columnist for the Jewish Chronicle and Jewish News, and has appeared on Talk TV, BBC Radio, LBC, has had a video interview by the Daily Mirror, and quoted often by international press such as Newsweek. He's helped to develop memorable grassroots campaigns such as the 48-hour social media walkout, which became a worldwide phenomenon, and the 3 anti-Semitism billboards which drove around Europe during a debate about anti-Semitism. Alex is going to talk to us about understanding the new anti-Semitism. Alex.
Thanks very much, Michael. So obviously out there, it's pretty ugly. And I'm not here to give any solutions or any answers, but it does help me, and I've generally found it helps people to try and understand a bit more about what's going on. So to give you a practical example, I would like to talk about the most dangerous image in the world. There is a poster with images on, which is so dangerous that people in Britain and all over the world have been frantically removing them wherever they appear as quickly as possible. And this has been caught on film and it's been photographed. You may well yourself have walked past some of the remnants of these posters. I have. And maybe you thought, well, why would people tear this down? Maybe it's something so warped that it could harm an impressionable mind or incite violence. But these are, of course, the missing posters. And this is the phenomenon of the missing posters. The posters show the images of babies, children, families, elderly people, and the only commonality is that they're Jewish and they were kidnapped. Now, I walked past one on the way to an anti-Semitism, a conference against anti-Semitism, and along the same street, other posters remained untouched. I even made a video about the missing posters on TikTok, and it went viral. It got 55,000 views. And what happened? It got mass reported because there's more anti-Semites than Jews. And so the story of the missing posters also went missing. So why are these posters so dangerous? And what is it about anti-Zionism? Well, these posters, they humanize Jews, and humanization is like kryptonite to anti-Semites, to their dehumanization campaigns. So one person was filmed writing colonizer on the poster of a baby. It was the worst thing that this person could think of to say. What he was actually saying was that this baby is bad. And that's the story of anti-Semitism. The Jews stop becoming people. They become an idea, a concept. And if the idea of evil is occupier or colonizer or secular Satan, Hitler, then that's the part that Jews are made to play. No longer an idea, no longer a people, but an idea. And that's why the most dangerous image in the world is an average Jewish face. And this is why on the same lamppost in LA, missing dog posters stay up. And on the other side of that very same lamppost, the face of a Jewish family gets ripped off. The Nazis had a word for this. They called it subhuman, less than even animals. And this is the story of anti-Zionism. But it doesn't just stop there. I'm just focusing on this particular thing just for now, because we all know about it. There was someone called Alex Jones in the States, and he harassed the parents of children killed in the Sandy Hook massacre. And he said that they weren't really killed. And in the end, there was a massive court case, and he was ordered to pay $965 million. He's a conspiracist, really. But since then, it's like a whole section of the world has turned into Alex Jones, not believing news reports about what Hamas did, demanding to see the evidence, saying, show me the bodies, because they want to recognize Jews like the ones maybe they saw in the Holocaust, but I don't think even that would stop their denial. And there's a familiarity as well with the taunting of Holocaust denial. As Primo Levi remember being told by an SS officer, and even if some proof should remain and some of you survive, people will say that the events you describe are too monstrous to be believed. They will say they are exaggerations of Allied propaganda and will believe us, who will deny everything, and not you. I have seen countless posts on social media saying no one was killed, the Israelis killed them, there are no bodies, etc., etc. So let's talk about this mindset. Let's talk about this new anti-Semitism. What is anti-Zionism? Anti-Zionism has been a long time in the making. Specifically, this campaign we're seeing the results of has been going for decades at another level. Now, I would say that the Jewish question has returned. I call it now the Jewish state question. And for some people, Israel is the symbol of the Jewish degeneracy that they fantasize about. And this is because post-Holocaust, attacking Jews as individuals became less acceptable. So instead, they portrayed the Jewish state as uniquely evil to give plausible deniability for their anti-Semitism. But of course, the end result is the same: attacks against Jews, dead Jews. So the Jewish question was how intellectuals framed their anti-Semitism as acceptable discourse, as legitimate debate. And what they said was, well, how are Jews harming the world? Why are they bad? How are they bad? And what can be done to stop them behaving in this way? To fix this Jewish problem? Do we remove their rights? Do we assimilate them? Or do we kill them? And now they've been asking the same thing about the Jewish state representing Jewishness. So we're now in a position where people will accept demonizing falsehoods about Israel without any question, and going against it can really be swimming against the tide in places like academia and the arts and the newsroom maybe as well. And the other thing is that unless you denounce Zionism and Israel in their hostile terms, then you become an enemy of the people outside of the community of the good. And let alone Israelis, they don't care what Palestinians think either, or whether it's good for them. They talk over them, like Amnesty did with their apartheid report, which was decades in the making. Now, the thing about anti-Zionists is they try to dissociate themselves from previous forms of anti-Semitism, and they repeatedly fail at that. This time, they say, this time it's warranted. This time it's justice. This time it's liberation. Last time it wasn't. Last time they got it wrong. But this time it's real. And that's, funnily enough, exactly what the people before said, and the people before them, and the people before them. They deny the link while using the same images and ideas. They think they're so clever, but they do not have an original thought in their heads. Look at the picture on the screen. It uses the same semi-medical language and about purity that the Nazis used. keep the world clean. And that's why the National Front, the neo-Nazi National Front, were the first ones to adopt this imagery. That's also why the far right all over the world have readopted anti-Zionism as their pet cause, from the fascists in Italy to the 2021 Polish march, where Kill the Jews was sung while they wore Palestinian kaffirs. And Andrew Anglin, he writes The Daily Stormer. He's a very well-known American Nazi, and he was banned off Twitter. And what was his first tweet when he was back? It was Zionists, not Jews. So Israel has become the new devil in the secular world, in a deity-free world. It used to be that we were the antichrist, anti-Christian, a threat to God. But now we're still the devil incarnate, but just in the form of Israel. So how can this happen? Well, like other forms of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is a way of seeing the entire world. It's the way of viewing the whole, a lens for viewing the whole world around you. It isn't logical, and it's a passion for the people that do it, and it gives them comfort in a very frightening and confusing world. It gives them a sense that maybe they know something, and that maybe they have control over events, because the idea that the world is a place that we have no control over, and where there's no pattern, there's no narrative that you can predict, is a very frightening thing. And the idea that no one is in control is much more frightening than the idea that evil Jews are controlling the world. Then they think at least someone is running it, and at least I know about it. And that's how a McChicken sandwich wrapper can become part of the plot to kill Palestinian kids. Yes, you heard it right. It's properly insane, and that is an ex-Labour MP posting about this. And this was a woman shouting at a McDonald's worker in the States because around the wrapper of a McChicken sandwich in McDonald's, the colour, they changed it to blue, just for that particular item, and just in the States. And apparently this was some Zionist plot. Sounds crazy, right? Well, unfortunately, a lot of people have been exposed to this kind of stuff. Iran State TV, which is banned in Britain for being complicit in torture, post on social media. They have a regular show, and it's all about how Zionism runs the world. And this can be anything from the war in Ukraine to football to comedy to politics. It's basically the protocols of the elders of Zion, but digital, because they post it on social media. Now, a survey was done about who was watching this, and it's like 11.5 million people, mostly in Britain, mostly on the left. This made, again, by the disgraced ex-Labour MP Chris Williamson and the disgraced Professor David Miller, who I call the chicken soup truther. And it talks about the sinister power of Jews. I've had friends featured on this program. My organization's been on this program. Chabad have been on this program. They say we run all walks of life. And the female presenter, by the way, who does the narration summary to sinister music, was recently used in an ITV feature to talk about Islamophobia in light of the Israel-Hamas conflict. So, anti-Zionism has portrayed Jews as the evil of today, and it derives specifically, mostly from Soviet anti-Semitic propaganda campaigns. It says that Jews are imperialist, colonizers, settlers, and even Nazis. The left, some on the left, split the world into imperialist and anti-imperialist. Now, on the imperialist side, you have countries like Britain, the USA, and Israel. And on the anti-imperialist side is Iran, is Russia, and Hamas, etc., etc., etc. And that is why progressives can side with people who not only oppose their values, but actually want to kill them. That is why we saw someone with an LGBT flag go to the rally in Trafalgar Square and get their flag ripped off them in 2 seconds and stamped all over. Anti-Zionism makes people see an organization who behave like ISIS as progressive freedom fighters. It turns people's brains into mush. The end result is people accepting killing Jews is resistance and liberation. So the excuses have simply changed from racial to national. Anti-Zionists get to self-identify as anti-racists. You'll hear them. I don't have a racist bone in my body. Whereas Jews don't get to self-identify as Zionists. Instead, we have a hostile identity forced on us. We're imperialist, racist, colonial, settlers, etc., etc. And we have to disavow Zionism in their terms. Anti-Zionism signifies a dangerous, dangerous phenomenon. It's irrational thinking and an unwillingness to face reality. Instead, they prefer a manufactured narrative. When George Floyd was killed, there was a significant movement blaming Israel. Can you imagine an American social movement with their problems about race was blamed on Israel? And then, of course, when BLM actually marched, George Soros was blamed by the other side for organizing it all. So I just want to talk about as well the origins of anti-Zionism, because I can prove that anti-Zionism existed before Zionism existed as a political movement. So I'm going to start in 2001, because that was a major part, and that was the UN Durban Conference Against Racism, the infamous one. It had been heavily influenced in the build-up in the regional conference in Iran, in Tehran, but Jews were not invited. They did not invite Jews, and they sent the plane tickets after the conference happened. So when Durban came up, it had already been sorted. It was all signed, sealed, and delivered. And they just repeated the same exercise again. An American delegate, who was actually a Holocaust survivor called Tom Lantos, described it as the most sickening display of anti-Semitism he'd seen since the Nazis. And I'm just going to outline a couple of points of what he experienced. This is the UN Durban Conference Against Racism, okay? The Protocols of Zion, the most influential anti-Semitic text ever written, was available at conference stands. Flyers using Nazi-style caricatures of Jews, which accused them of being child killers, were handed out. Swastikas were taped to the wall, and a Hitler was right banner was unfurled by 20,000 people. Jewish delegates were intimidated, silenced, harassed, and abused. It was at this conference that calling Israel an apartheid state and accusing it as the sole source of wrongdoing in the world became the cause of the day at the expense of every other cause. And this is still the case. And Amnesty and the other NGOs signed a declaration calling Israel a racist apartheid state guilty of genocide. And this is why no one can think straight about Israel. This legitimized this virulent anti-Zionism and restarted the Soviet campaign from the 1970s, Zionism is racism. It was just really a rebirth of that. And it paved the way for so much of the violence and the excuses for violence, mainly, that we're seeing today. The anti-Semitism of the left, which is anti-Zionism, contemporary anti-Zionism, draws from Soviet anti-Semitism, which reached another level post-1967 when they realized Israel finally would never become a communist outpost for them. They spent a lot of capital putting out anti-Zionist material across the entire world. The Soviets said that Israel was Nazi, illegitimate, and imperialist, and then they used the same tactics for Ukraine, because Putin was a KGB lieutenant after all. And I'm going to go back further now. The Nazis also railed against a Jewish state, saying it was illegitimate. The idea of one was illegitimate, and that the idea of one was imperialist. In Mein Kampf, Hitler wrote about how a Jewish state would be inherently evil. The Zionists, he said, tried to make the rest of the world believe that the national consciousness of the Jew finds its satisfaction in the creation of a Palestinian state. So no, Hitler was not a Zionist. And I'm going to go back even further. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the most anti-Semitic text created, the Soviets and the Nazis both drew from this. This was their source material to a large degree, and it was created in 1903 by the Tsar's secret police. But here's the key. It was written as a response to the First Zionist Congress in 1897, and it claimed to be the secret minutes from the Congress, even though the Congress was a public meeting and attended by non-Jews and the press. And I'm going to go back even further, because decades earlier than that, in 1800s France, there was hysteria about Jews gaining rights and leaving the ghetto, and this was shown in anti-Rothschilds cartoons in the newspapers, and the Rothschilds were shown leading Jews out of France and to Israel, which was ridiculous. The Rothschilds were so comfortable. Why on earth would they leave the fortune that they'd made and the comfort of Europe to go and start again in a barren wasteland? Absolute hysteria. I'm going to go back even further now, because the medieval blood libel started in England by a guy called Thomas of Monmouth, and he created the template. And actually, there's a part of it that not many people talk about, and that is that the scriptures required the blood of non-Jewish children so that Jews could return to Israel again and have self-determination and regain their status. So that's medieval England. You've got anti-Zionism there. Now that really explains why you get this kind of imagery, why Jews on social media get called child killers to an obsessive degree. And I'm going to go back even further. And this is the last bit where I'm going to go back with anti-Zionism. And then I'm just going to touch on Hamas. Augustine was a bishop, and he was the most important church father. And without him, Judaism may not have survived past the 5th century. And the reason was he was an anti-Zionist. Hear me out. He said that Jews should not be murdered, but that their loss of land and their loss of self-determination showed that Christianity was the superior replacement of Judaism. And so Judaism survived, but the theological basis for anti-Zionism was created. And so we can see now that anti-Zionism that we see today is actually the tip of a very, very long ideological heritage. There's all these layers of cake. You know, when you have a slice of cake, there's all these layers. And when people take a bite out of it, they're taking a bite out of all those layers going back thousands of years. So who exactly are Hamas? Well, the Nazi influence in the Middle East is hugely, hugely underreported. There's 2 historians that I know of that have spoken about it, and they are absolutely brilliant. The Nazis used the latest tech of their day, which was the radio, and it was extremely effective because literacy rates in the Middle East were extremely low. And this way, their message could get pumped out into cafes and bazaars and so on. And they used trusted known voices, authority figures, to rail against Jews and imperialism and so on. And what they said would actually be really interesting and dangerous, and so would become the talking point of the day, kind of like juicy gossip, I guess. It was a hugely successful campaign, and the Nazi department for the radio broadcast in the Middle East had 255 people. That's how important it was to them. And the countries which didn't receive the broadcast were actually less anti-Semitic. So Hassan al-Banna founded the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. And he was a Hitler fanatic. And when I say he was a Hitler fanatic, I mean it. He translated Mein Kampf and he called it My Jihad. And he translated Der Stürmer, the Nazi propaganda paper. He was also friends with the Mufti of Jerusalem, the Nazi who coordinated directly with Hitler to expand the Holocaust to the Middle East. And the Muslim Brotherhood, which al-Banna founded, were directly funded by Nazi Germany, and they organized anti-Jewish sentiment and violence. And they had a saying, Jews out of Egypt and out of Palestine. And after the war, using threats and a huge rally, and 100,000 person rally, a bit like the one that we saw at the weekend, the Muslim Brotherhood pressured the Arab coalition to reject the two states and to launch a war to try and destroy Israel. I'm talking about the Muslim Brotherhood because Hamas became their armed wing in Palestine. So we could say the Hamas attack, which bore such a stark resemblance to the Nazi death squad, is the legacy of the Nazi influence in the Middle East. I think I'll stop there because that was quite a lot to take in. Thank you very much for listening. I think you're muted. Michael, you're muted.
Thank you. Right. Thank you very much, Alex. That was a real education. Now, just before I pass over to Judy for the questions, I'd like to ask a couple myself. First of all, Alex, you've told us what the history of anti-Semitism is, anti-Zionism. I'd like to ask you, how do we combat anti-Semitism in the UK, which is now obviously on the increase? And do you think the police are acting impartially? And Nuru, I'd like to ask, do you think there's a danger of, or how much of a danger is there of the current war expanding across the Middle East and even further, including Iran?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
I don't have any answers for combating anti-Semitism. It's what I do, but I do not have any answers, any easy answers, certainly. This has been a very clever campaign, especially in recent decades. There's been infiltration, I say infiltration, but influence really, in areas where there's freedom is really valued. And so it's really easy for people with an agenda to take advantage of that and use that as a springboard, like academia and the arts and places like this. So I think that we need to actually understand it and we need to educate it about it. We need to stop teaching the Holocaust in isolation. Some of those racists that I talked about, they're signing Holocaust memorial books to whitewash their activities. We need to teach the Holocaust in the context of anti-Semitism. We need to teach anti-Semitism, and we need to teach what Jews actually are. I have a part in when I give a talk to non-Jews, I always make a point of actually explaining what Jews are. So we need to do that. We need to really fight against the intellectual justifications of it, because that smooths the path for the violence. You know, from the river to the sea, intifada, jihad, and the misreporting and all that, it all adds up to this climate of hate. We need to fight the intellectual, the soft stuff quite hard, I think. We need to use the full weight of the law against people. We are British citizens. We are entitled to have protection under the law. And we need to start using that. We set up a unit, a counter-terrorism unit, and a unit to report malicious communications and other unlawful activity. And there's a lot of it out there. And if anyone has experienced it, they should really try and report it, I would say.
Go to Andrew and Paula Arendt, who've got a question.
Right. I have a question which I don't know whether it can be answered in this discussion, but I had an interesting communication with family in Israel a little while ago, and I offered safe haven to this family if things got worse. They live just outside Jerusalem. They're our family. I got a response thanking me, but at the same time they said they feel safer where they are, and they feel safer than they think we in the UK are. So that made me think. And at the same time, I asked this question. If the border between Gaza and Israel had not been breached, we wouldn't have the death of civilians, other than the attempts with the rockets, which are mostly disabled by the Iron Dome. And is there a reason why the border was breached at that particular time, in particular after the Egyptian warnings to Israel, and nothing was done about it? And the IDF certainly wasn't in any control of what was going on at that point. So I think that's one of the reasons, maybe not the entire reason, but that's one of the reasons that the Israelis were doomed by that attack by, you like to call them, Alex, anti-Zionists. I like to call them anti-Jews. I think we should start using the word Jew much more openly rather than Zionism or Israel. We should start saying openly, it's Jews who are being attacked. It's not Israelis, it's Jews in particular.
Well, I think recent events have quite clearly shown that to be the case, haven't they? That's indisputable now. And anyone saying otherwise is being transparently disingenuous, I think. As far as people in Israel talking about worrying about our safety, well, seeing everything online, it's bad. I've never known anything like this. It's incessant, and it's just a wave. It's almost impossible to keep up with it. And people are seeing this stuff. They see it on the news and the international news, and there's social media. They don't even need the international news. They can see all these little things. They're major things really that are happening. And you know what they think? They think, at least I'm around Jews here, my fellow Jews, and we can suffer or die or not, but whatever we do, it's together. So I can understand that. And I would just urge people not to sink too low into the online despair, because it's very sad.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to move on to Alexander Boyd.
Hi. Boyd. Thank you. I've put in the chat, there is a person who is in the next town known to me who is posting really horrid anti-Semitic things. I've posted it to the police, who said, oh, if you think it's anti-Semitism, blah, blah, sort of wishy-washy answers. We live in an area where there's very few Jews around. My children are the only Jewish children in their primary school and in their special educational needs school. Now, my son's school, they were straight on it and taking up all the information from the board of deputies and sort of trying to help him and explain him and support him. Now, my daughter's school was a little bit different. I had to nudge them a little bit. It's a Church of England school, so, but these posts from that woman are really, actually, they're concerning and scary. And I know her myself, and I know she's a little bit, I think she's got mental health issues. So I'm worried that I bump into her, but the police just doesn't want to know.
I think it's the kind of thing that you should be sending to the CST for a start. They can advise. I have, without seeing the post, it's difficult for me to comment. If the police aren't acting on something which is clearly malicious communication, then obviously they're not following the law, and that's problematic, and that needs to be exposed, and they need to be pushed to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go now to Leon Smith, who's got a question. Let me just help him to unmute. Leon, you should be able.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Alex, my question is, we've got problems everywhere. The anti-Semitism is raising its ugly head in every direction we look. Given that we're a tiny community in relative terms, and we have limited communal resource, including the CST, do you think we should be, in inverted commas, wasting our time on relatively minor things, like obsessing about the BBC and the use of the word terrorist? And another example is a lot of energy went into trying to lobby the FA to light up the Wembley Arch in blue. All of these things are important. I'm not minimizing them in any way at all. But given our limited resource, do you not think we should be prioritizing, and particularly the CST?
Well, yes and no. The CST always prioritize stuff. They're brilliant, and they look after us, and they will only deal with the serious stuff. So yeah, I'm not worried that the CST are getting pulled left and right too much. They will do what they do, and they'll stay on it. And yeah, I sympathize. It's a really difficult one, because it's a difficult question. It's a good question, because with the FA thing, they did it for other attacks, and people are thinking, well, why not us? Like, this is much worse. This is on a much bigger scale. So I really get it. And it's just, you know what? It's just an indication of a type of thinking, right? The whole Jews don't count thing. And then there's the terrorist thing. Yeah, I mean, by itself, it's not a big thing. And at first I was thinking it wasn't, but then the boundaries got pushed and pushed and pushed. And then, like, today, Sky are saying that Hamas released hostages when they didn't. Israel did an operation overnight and got them released them themselves, without Hamas. So I think with these little things, they build up. I think we're right to fight sometimes the little things, but I also recognize that we must be careful with expending energy, because we are a small community. So we have to pick our battles, and we're always going to be outnumbered. We have to recognize that. And that's why we need to try and get allies and rally people as well, as much as we can. So yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't have a right answer for it, because I think that sometimes it's good to fight the small things, and sometimes it's not, and you just need to pick the battles and case by case basis.
Okay, thanks very much, Alex.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Richard Alber.
And to Alex, also referring to this thing that's just been mentioned about the BBC, I've noticed a slight difference in the way the BBC is talking about Israel, which is not quite as antagonistic as it used to be. There's a more of a balanced, nuanced view to it. And my last thing to Alex is, I have come across, not a lot, but a few Jews who side with the Palestinians to the total exclusion of their Jewish heritage. How have you come across that, and do you find it as dangerous as I feel I do?
Yeah,
that's quite a few questions. I think we should let Nora come back first.
Yeah.
All right. So,
thank you. Do you want to come back, Alex?
Yeah. So on the subject of the BBC, I think they've actually done a lot of damage to their reputation. I think a lot of people can see through it. am a huge fan of the BBC. So it's been extremely upsetting for me to see what's happened to them. And lots of people I know feel similarly. So when they miss out context such as, well, we're actually reporting figures given to us by Hamas, the genocidal racists who want to kill all Jews in the world, you know, that's not great journalism, in my opinion. That is kind of important. And if you don't do that, you're kind of spreading their propaganda for them. And, you know, I don't pay my taxes for an ISIS propaganda wing, to be quite frank. And I find it extremely upsetting because I really value the BBC. And they're the gold standard. They're very well respected. But I think they realize they're being watched. And there is a significant movement before this against the BBC. There's a significant movement. And now they've done their reputation even more damage. So, yeah, I think they're being watched, and maybe they're being a little more careful because they were so out of order before. And as for the Jews who are very, very pro-Palestinian and perhaps anti-Jewish, well, why wouldn't they, given the anti-Semitic history which I've explained? The weight, the pressure of thousands of years of anti-Semitic elements of society trying to get you to conform. It's too much for some people to bear, and we should probably feel sorry for them, to be honest. Michael asked a question, and I don't think I answered it. It was about the police. Are they doing their job? Can I just really quickly answer that?
Yes, please do.
The police aren't actually doing their job because hate crime is when a protected community, i.e. Jews in this case, feel threatened. And in the context of Israel-Palestine, jihad and intifada only has one meaning: violence and death of Jews. There is no other interpretation, and we feel rightly threatened, and that is against hate crime legislation. So that's my answer. That's what I've pushed for. That's what our statement in the newspapers asked for when we were asked for it, and that's what we'll continue to push for, is that they enforce the law fully. But for some reason, the police are being very hesitant to get involved.
Thank you. Well, I think if there are no more questions, which there seem not to be, it may be a good time to be pulling this to a close. So I'll pass back to Michael.
The expression that comes to mind, if my French is correct, plus le change, plus de la même chose. Things do not seem to get any better. We go backwards rather than forwards. I think we've had a real education tonight. Unfortunately, it seems as though we're probably earlier in the conflict. We're not even reached probably the end of the first quarter of it yet. So there's an awful lot more to come, both on both counts, what Noor has talked about, the situation in Gaza, and also what Alex has been talking about in terms of anti-Semitism outside Israel. So I'd like to feel that we could ask both of them if they'll come along and talk to us again, because things are changing so rapidly. I'm sure that they'll be able to report in a total updated way. So on behalf of everybody, can we thank them both for their presentations, and also to everybody who's dialed in on Zoom and also who's been watching us on YouTube.